My husband and I are avid campers. Rain or shine, snow or ice, we go camping year-round all across Ontario. For the most part, it's always an incredibly relaxing and fun time. We do have our favourite parks, but always look to explore new ones. A few years ago, we heard about a little campground a few hours north of where we live, and decided to check it out over the Labor Day weekend and into the following week. Personally, Labor Day weekend is the best to go because if you can take the time, the parks are typically busy during the actual weekend, but because it's the last day of the summer, they completely empty out on the Monday, Tuesday, because families are going back to work and school. Another plus is that typically, the farther the park, the less busy it will also be, because people who live in the city don't normally drive up that far for a couple of days, at least in our experience. So we get to the park, not only is it beautiful, but as we suspected it was quite empty. There were only a couple other families there on the first day we arrived. Unfortunately, the weather on the first night ended up not being the best, and after a night of rain, we saw the other campers packing up and leaving. We went for a walk and very quickly noticed had the entire place to ourselves. Legit, it was empty aside from us. For the next couple of nights, we just did our normal activities of exploring, cooking great food, playing board games, etc. On what turned out to be our last night, the rain came back and was really heavy. We decided to stick it out and just hang around our site. As it was getting later, I couldn't help but get an eerie feeling but brushed it off because it was dark, rainy, we were alone, and a thunderstorm was coming in. After dinner, we decided we'd head to bed early. We cleaned up our dishes, put away our food, and retired to our tent. The reason I say this is to highlight there was no food, dishes left out as to not attract any animals. By that time, the thunder was really loud and lightning had started. Despite all the weather, we somehow were able to fall asleep. I'm not sure at what time, but at some point I ended up waking up in the middle of the night. The thunder was dying down, but the lightning was so close, intense, that every time it clashed, it would light up our site, and I could see shadows of the trees, picnic table, etc. outside through the tent. I remember laying there for a few moments just watching and turned to my husband who was sleeping beside me completely unbothered. After a few moments, that eerie feeling came back and at an overwhelmingly intense rate. I started getting super spooked but realized I couldn't really move. As I was starting to internally panic, that was when not only did I hear, but I saw something moving around outside the tent. At first I couldn't believe it, but as the lightning kept lighting the site up, 100,000%, there was a large bipedal figure moving around outside our tent, and on the site, I couldn't move. All I could do is watch as it crept closer and closer to our tent door. From what it looked like through the shadow was a humanoid figure much taller than a person with a larger head. Terrified, I just watched as who or whatever this thing was started coming into our tent. But it didn't open the tent, rather just came through it. At that point, I must have blacked out due to fear, because when I woke up, it was the morning and my husband was cooking food. To say I was freaked out was an understatement. We had probably camped at least 50 times by this point and had never experienced anything like that before. I told my husband and he kind of brushed it off pretty quickly, saying I most likely just had a bad dream. Now I do get sleep paralysis, so thought maybe, but I had never experienced it that vividly before. It was so incredibly real, and the fact that I could move around at first was very different from any experience I had had in the past. I'd essentially wake up paralyzed. Anyways, because I was extremely freaked out and couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, he started packing up and we decided to leave that day. A few months later, I randomly brought up this story to him. As I was explaining what I experienced, he then confessed to me that he had lied to me that morning. As per him, that night he had also woken up at some point and saw a person-like figure creeping around outside too. He assumed he was just having a bad dream. He too felt uneasy in the morning, but he didn't want to say anything to me, as he didn't want to freak me out. He told me when I then got up and I shared I saw it too. It validated to him he wasn't just dreaming. Neither one of us really checked out the site for footprints or anything, as we both thought at the time it was a bad dream. But because of the heavy rain, I don't think we would have been able to see anything anyways. We still go camping, lol. But that was one of two of the scariest experiences we've ever had in an Ontario park. We've talked about since and have no idea what it was. Was there a person lurking around? Was it something paranormal? Did we both just have the same shared sleep paralysis episode? When I think back to the visual of this being, it almost seemed unearthly, maybe alien. Especially how it just seemed to glide through and into our tent. No idea, but thought I would share to hear others' thoughts or similar experiences. Me and my buddy were on a week-long mountain biking camping trip with all of the supplies we need loaded on our backpacks. Anyway, I'll keep this short just for ease of read. First night we log about 70 kilometers. Keep in mind, lots of trails, and we were pacing ourselves and set up camp. Cooked ourselves dinner on a fire and all was good. Went to bed in the tent pretty early as we had a long day ahead of ourselves the next day. So while we are lying there, we start hearing howling from a coyote or wolf pretty close by. Less than 200 meters, or so I thought. I'll explain later, away from our tent. Definitely worth noting, and me and my buddy note to not go to washroom alone, or anything, in case there's a pack of dogs running around nearby. We both had knives and bear spray, and I had a 3 bars extendo, so we personally weren't all that worried about some wild dogs. We slowly fall asleep, and the howling continues throughout the night, periodically. We finally wake up after 7 hours sleep. I can never get a full good night's rest in a tent, and we start out fire again to prepare for breakfast while packing the tent up. Keep in mind, soon after we woke up, we left the tent, and by then the howling had stopped. I didn't think anything of it, just figured the wolf, dog, coyote had ran off during the night. We got the tent packed up before our water came to a boil, and I decide I'd go take a dump. I brought toilet paper, so I was going to be in bliss. I walk about 30 to 40 meters away and find a nice spot tucked behind a hill with some trees at the bottom and a nice creek going by. Blissful. I drop my pants and pop a squat and am having a great time when all of a sudden I heard some slight rustling behind one of the trees 10 or so feet in front of me. I'm looking to make sure nothing's gonna sneak up on me while I am shitting. That instinct is hardwired into you if you're in the wild. And sure enough, I see a piece of a leather boot behind this one tree, and above it I see pieces of green fabric. Nope. I pulled my pants up without wiping and ran backwards up the hill while still looking at the boot and tree or whatever was behind it. I get to the top of the hill and am thinking, what the absolute fuck? But I pull my knife out of my cargo pockets and just stay there to gauge what was behind the tree. It moved along the top of the hill as to get a different angle of the back of the tree. Sure enough, I get 10 or so feet across the hill and can clearly see the boots, pants, which I now realize are camouflage, and the rest of this figure. In my new vantage point, I start to see a camo jacket as well, and as I look to the head, at this point, I don't know if it's a corpse or what. Oh my god, what the holy fuck, he was staring at me the whole time. This creepy old face with black stripes, like a football player, glaring at me, and fully acknowledged the fact that I knew he was there. I flared my knife to make sure he knew not to run at me, and I yelled for my buddy to come check this out. My buddy starts running over, and the guy just slowly backs off into the trees. My buddy gets there in time to see what I am pointing at, although hard, when the guy was camoed top to bottom before the guy slipped out of distance. I explained to him what had happened, and we clearly both had an uneasy feeling, so we went to get our shit and leave the camp ASAP. We could always cook later. So we put the fire out and fly off on our bikes, and after putting 10 kilometers within ourselves and the camp, the mysterious old creepy guy was out of my thought. We probably only logged 30 kilometers that day because it was terrible backcountry and we were off-roading. We set up camp for our second night, cook, and get ready for bed again. All is good. Wake up, do the same routine as the first day, but this time actually shit in peace, and we also managed to eat our oats this time around. So we pack up and head off on our third day. We logged even less distance this day than the day before. It was really cliffy terrain, we dry ground, and lots of energy used per km. We only made it about 25 kilometers that day. In keeping with our cycle, we do the same we had the previous 2 nights. Set up camp, ate, and then got ready for sleep. We get in the tent, turn our lantern on for a few minutes just to chat before sleep, and then we hear it again. More howls. Pretty cool, actually. Maybe by now we roamed into another pack's territory. Just go together if we go to washroom and carry bear spray and knives. The howling continues for the hour before we fall asleep. We wake up at the crack of dawn, and to our surprise, the animal is still howling every so often in the morning. Better keep our eyes open. We do our morning ritual and prepare to leave the camp. The dog howls again, and this time I got a good idea of where the sound came from and actually could figure out the rough vicinity of where it came from. I'm looking up a hill where I thought the dog would be, and sure enough, I fucking see those same leather boots and camo slacks that I was talking about earlier. This guy's still staring at me, and you know what? The howl was coming from him. I shit you not. That just made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, so I hit my buddy and told him we are going now. He knew what was going on, so we got our bags and left the fire going. Sorry, I didn't know if this guy was armed or what, and bolted. We decided to cut our trip short and made the journey back to our houses within the next 2 days. But the rest of the trip was completely uncomfortable because that guy had somehow tracked us through 70 kilometers of deep bush without us noticing, and 2 nights of our trip he was watching our tent while howling in the mass. Distance. So if he wanted to track us again, he probably could. My husband and I love camping all year round. Rain or shine, snow or ice, we love it. Although we have our favourites, we always like to find new parks to explore. My husband comes from a family of campers, and we constantly are sharing feedback on parks when we get together. A couple of years ago, after the driftwood instance, we were talking to one of his uncles who was highly recommending this northern park called Brent. He had just recently come back from it with his wife and kids and thought we would appreciate it as much as he did. As we were talking, his wife overheard and started to chime in. As per her, it was a gorgeous park, but the moment they pulled into it, there's an hour drive from the highway to the actual campgrounds. She mentioned she felt something was off. She couldn't really describe it in much detail, other than she felt incredibly uncomfortable and uneasy. Apparently, for the entire time they were there, she felt so uncomfortable that she couldn't even leave the tent and wanted to cut their trip short because of how strange she felt, and that she would never go back there. The thing with Brent is that it actually has a pretty rich history. From my understanding, it was originally occupied by the Algonquin indigenous people prior to European colonization in the 1800s. When explorers arrived, they quickly began logging, and by the early 1900s, Brent was established and had a semi-large population of people due to the development of the railway. Apparently, the town remained occupied up until the late 80s, early 90s, but ended up being abandoned when the CNR dismantled the rail line to the town. When you go down the hour road from the highway to the park, you first have to go through the kind of ghost town before you can get to your site. The reason I say kind of ghost town is that there are still a very small amount of families that still occupy a couple of the houses, now primarily cottages, due to having the property grandfathered down to them. Aside from that, when we went, you could walk around the abandoned sawmill, walk down parts of the now abandoned railroad, and walk through what's left of the town. History lesson done. When we got there, I fully understood what my husband's aunt had mentioned. We ended up getting lost on way up to the park, so didn't actually arrive until well after the sun had set. I'll also mention that this trip was during the Canadian Thanksgiving weekend. I'll never forget how dark it was driving down that road, but when we finally got to our site, it was the brightest and biggest full moon I've ever seen. We're no strangers to setting up in the dark, so put up the tent, made a quick bite, and went to bed. Then, next morning we decided to explore, and I will say it was quite interesting to walk through an environment like that. It's a small but spaced out campground, and we soon realized that there were maybe only 1 or 2 other campers there, but that they were far off from us. Our site was lakefront on the far side of the lake. My husband loves fishings, so it was perfect. One morning while I was reading, he came back from his little fishing moment as he found a cast iron cauldron in the area where he was fishing. Should he have? Probably not, but he brought it back to our site. Given what we had learnt about the area and the condition of it, we thought it was kind of cool and thought nothing more of it. Later that day, we both ended up having a nap. I remember waking up, hearing footsteps outside the tent. I looked over and saw my husband wasn't there, so assumed he had gotten up before me and went outside. After a few minutes, I heard my husband yelling. I sat up thinking, why is he yelling? But he was saying things like, "Buddy, hey buddy, what are you doing? This is our campsite, you can't be here." I was just sitting in the tent now, starting to get concerned, but he kept yelling, "Who are you? Why are you here? You need to leave." As I started to get up to check what was going on, I heard my husband getting closer, saying the same things to whoever this person was. After a few more minutes, my husband came into the tent and said a man in weird clothes, with no jacket or boots, just wandered onto our site and walked into the water, seeming to look for something, but wouldn't acknowledge him, thus why he was yelling. He was clearly shook up, but said he'd be right back because he watched this person finish looking in the water and then turned around and just started walking back off our site, completely ignoring him. I'll also mention again, it's October. You needed at least a coat because it had been snowing, and one doesn't just walk into the water because the lakes are freezing. I'm now freaked out, but he says to me, I'll be right back. As freaked out as he was, he wanted to see if maybe the man was a lost camper or something. About 10 over 15 minutes later, my husband comes back to report he couldn't find anyone. There were a couple of other sites behind us, but they were completely empty, and there was no sign of any cars that had pulled up aside from our own. We both just stared at each other like, what was that? Why did this man randomly walk onto our site, not acknowledge his or our presence, and seemingly just disappear? We don't know who or what that presence was, but knowing the history of the land and the sense of uneasiness we both felt, I almost wonder if we saw a spirit from someone that used to live on the land or in the town. As creepy as it was, it definitely makes me feel a little better thinking that than there being an actual person living in the forest so near to where we were camping.